Showa Godzilla. He was born brown, not the charcoal gray everyone remembers. In 1954, the very first Godzilla suit, the Shodaigoji, was covered in a scarred, keloid-textured hide meant to look like the burns of Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors, and the color only shifted to black in the sequels that followed. He stood 50 meters tall in the story, a prehistoric reptile living undisturbed at the bottom of the Pacific until a hydrogen bomb test destroyed his home, killed his kind, and dragged him screaming to the surface. His design was a patchwork of extinct animals, the head and body of a Tyrannosaurus, the arms of an iguanodon, and the jagged dorsal plates of a stegosaurus running down his spine. That first suit weighed 200 pounds and stood just 6.5 feet, worn by stuntman Haruo Nakajima in punishing heat inside a rubber shell with almost no visibility. And here's the twist nobody expects from a monster movie. This Godzilla dies. He's dissolved to the bone by a weapon called the Oxygen Destroyer at the end of his first film, a quiet, almost mournful death for a creature that was never really the villain. He was a warning. A second Godzilla rose the very next year in Godzilla Raids Again, slimmer and more agile, so he could brawl with Anguirus on screen, and from there the suit kept mutating film after film, era after era. Across 15 movies stretching to 1975, the Showa Godzilla softened. The horror movie Snarl of 1954 rounded out into something almost heroic, a monster who started fighting other monsters to protect Japan instead of destroying it himself. By the time he was dancing with his adopted son Manila and teaming up against aliens and giant insects, the creature born from atomic dread had become something else entirely. A mascot. Same name, same scars, a completely different animal underneath. That's the pattern that would define every Godzilla to come. A monster shaped less by biology than by whatever fear or hope was gripping Japan at the time it walked ashore. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on your favorite Godzilla design. Let's get back into the video. Heisei Godzilla. 30 years after the original died, a new Godzilla surfaced in 1984's The Return of Godzilla, and this one came with a rule the earlier series never had: continuity. Every Heisei film from 1984 to 1995 fed directly into the next, one unbroken timeline. This Godzilla wasn't just huge, he was hungry, and not for people. He fed on nuclear reactors, cracking open the Ahama nuclear power plant to devour raw fuel straight from the core. Because his heart was later revealed to be a literal biological nuclear reactor keeping him alive. Absorb enough radiation, and he grew. After gorging on a Soviet submarine's power supply, he shot up from 80 meters to 100, becoming, at the time, the tallest big-screen Godzilla Toho had ever produced. In 1989's Godzilla vs. Biollante, the suit was redesigned into what fans call the Byogoji, the template for the rest of the era. Smaller head, longer neck, built to radiate raw mass and power rather than the rounder profile of the Showa years. But here's where it gets interesting. The same nuclear energy that made this Godzilla nearly unkillable was also a countdown. In 1995's Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, Godzilla's internal reactor overloaded from a lifetime of absorbing radiation, and his body began to melt down from the inside, turning him into a glowing, cracking, volcanic version of himself known as Burning Godzilla. His own power supply was killing him, and there was nothing in his biology built to stop it. He died in that meltdown, radiation levels spiking so high they threatened to end all life on Earth. And in his final act, the only thing that survived him was the son he'd revived earlier in the story, Godzilla Jr., who absorbed the fatal radiation and became the next Godzilla in his place. The lesson of the Heisei era was simple, and it echoed through the sequels. The same force that makes this monster a god is the same force that eventually kills him. TriStar Godzilla. Then, Hollywood tried. In 1998, TriStar Pictures released an American Godzilla that broke almost every rule the character had followed for 44 years. Designed by Patrick Tadopoulos, this Godzilla wasn't a prehistoric reptile mutated by a bomb. He was a marine iguana, an ordinary lizard whose egg was exposed to a French nuclear test at Mururoa Atoll in 1968. 30 years of unchecked mutation later, that iguana had grown into a 55-meter, lean, bird-like theropod, built for speed instead of raw power, sprinting through New York City on all fours like something out of Jurassic Park, rather than the stiff, bipedal Toho suits fans had grown up with. He had no atomic breath in the original script at all. Producer Dean Devlin added a last-minute nuclear pulse only because the film felt incomplete without it. Fans hated him. The design, the origin, the personality, none of it resembled the King of the Monsters, and the backlash was loud enough that Toho stepped in. When TriStar's rights expired in 2003, Toho reclaimed the design and gave it a new name entirely, Zilla. Their official reasoning was blunt. The creature had, in their words, taken the god out of Godzilla. As Zilla, the character got one more shot in 2004's Godzilla, Final Wars reimagined as a separate, lesser monster who shows up in Sydney only to be killed off by the real Godzilla in a fight that lasts all of a few seconds. It's the only entry on this list where the studio itself declared the creature wasn't really Godzilla anymore. Millennium Godzilla. By 1999, Toho had abandoned continuity altogether. The Millennium series, starting with Godzilla 2000, Millennium, ran on a staggered anthology format where each film got its own fresh timeline and its own version of Godzilla, unconnected to the one before it. What united most of them was a single discovery buried in Godzilla's cells. Organizer G1, a substance scientist in the film, determined could heal Godzilla's tissue completely within hours, leaving no scar tissue behind, rendering him functionally immortal. When his skin was blasted off by missiles, it simply grew back. This Godzilla's atomic breath changed too, glowing a deep incendiary orange instead of the cold blue fans knew, and in the film's climax, he used it not just to attack, but to strategize, luring an alien creature called Orga into swallowing him headfirst so he could detonate from the inside. And then there is the exception that defines the whole era. None of it stuck. Every subsequent Millennium film reset the clock, introducing new Godzillas with different origins, different weaknesses, different rules. Godzilla vs. Megaguirus had its own continuity. Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all-out attack, had another. The regeneration, the orange beam, the alien encounter, all of it belonged to one single movie, never touched again. Where the Heisei era built one long story, the Millennium era treated Godzilla like an idea that could be rewritten from scratch every single time, and that instability is exactly why the era still divides fans today. MonsterVerse Godzilla. In 2014, Legendary Pictures tried what the TriStar couldn't, and American Godzilla fans would actually accept. Director Gareth Edwards and his team scrapped the iguana approach entirely and built their creature from apex predators instead, blending the muscle mass of a bear, the facial structure of an eagle, and the armored bulk of a Komodo dragon into something that finally looked like a god again. Standing 355 feet or 108.2 meters and weighing 90,000 tons, this Godzilla became the heaviest incarnation of the character ever put on screen, powered by what the films call a bionuclear circulatory system, channeling energy up through his dorsal spines until it detonates as atomic breath. By 2019's Godzilla, King of the Monsters, after a brutal fight with a rival titan called Muto Prime, he'd grown again to 393 feet or 119.8 meters, becoming officially the tallest Godzilla to ever appear in a live-action film. Here's the reversal that separates this Godzilla from nearly every version before him. He isn't really the villain, and he isn't neutral either. Given the scientific designation Titanus Gojira, he's framed as an ancient alpha, a keeper of balance among the world's monsters, one who fought alongside Mothra in prehistory to seal away King Ghidorah, and who later allies with Kong against a shared threat. Godzilla went from nuclear metaphor to nuclear-powered hero to something closer to a planetary guardian, all while getting physically larger with nearly every film. Bigger, friendlier, and somehow still capable of leveling entire cities without breaking stride. Shin Godzilla. In 2016, Toho did something no version of the character had ever done on screen. They made him evolve in real time across a single film. Shin Godzilla begins not as a monster, but as a hidden shape, a tail barely glimpsed surfacing in Tokyo Bay, the vague first form of a creature that had secretly been growing off nuclear waste dumped in the ocean decades earlier. Within hours, it comes ashore as a second form nicknamed Kamada-kun, a nightmare with tiny stub arms and sickly yellow skin, dragging itself through streets on its belly. Then it evolves again into a third form, Shinagawa-kun, standing upright for the first time but with legs so undeveloped they visibly shake with every step. But here's where it gets interesting. The government hesitates, and that hesitation gives the creature time to mutate one more time. The fourth form, Kamakura-san, arrives fully bipedal, jet black with glowing red seams across its body and towering at 118.5 meters, making it the tallest Godzilla to appear in any film up to that point. Scientists in the movie call it, without exaggeration, a god incarnate. It takes a coordinated freezing agent, pumped directly into its bloodstream by every branch of the Japanese government working in concert, to finally stop it, not kill it, just freeze it mid-stride. And in the film's final shot, the frozen tail cracks open to reveal something worse waiting underneath. Rows of humanoid figures fused together, already beginning to break free. Shin Godzilla never stopped evolving. The movie just ended before we saw where it was going. Godzilla Earth, skip forward 20,000 years, and Godzilla stops being a monster humanity fights and becomes the entire ecosystem humanity has to survive inside of. That's the premise of the 2017-2018 anime trilogy, beginning with Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters, where a small group of human refugees returns to an Earth abandoned decades earlier, only to find their planet has been completely reshaped around one creature. Godzilla Earth, as this incarnation is called, spent those 20,000 years in uninterrupted growth, evolving from something closer to plant-based life into the single largest Godzilla ever put on screen. 300 meters tall, 100,000 metric tons, dwarfing every prior version by a margin that isn't close. His green, fin-like plates make him look almost grown rather than built, a creature that has fused with the biosphere itself rather than simply living in it. The scale of his power matches the scale of his body. A super oscillatory wave lets him crush enemies just by roaring at devastating volume, while a single swing of his tail generates a shockwave called the plasma cutter, capable of wiping out an entire military force in one motion. And in the film, it does exactly that, annihilating the returning human army almost the instant they land. There's no version of Godzilla before or since who so completely stops being a threat to be fought and becomes instead a force of nature to simply live around. The tagline of the trilogy could have been simpler than any of its dialogue. Humanity didn't lose the war. Humanity just arrived too late to realize the war was already over. Godzilla Ultima, the 2021 Netflix anime Godzilla Singular Point, pushed the evolving on-screen idea even further than Shin Godzilla did, turning transformation into the entire structure of the story. This Godzilla begins as Godzilla Aquatilis, a fully aquatic form living unnoticed beneath the waves, before coming ashore and shifting into Godzilla Amphibia. From there, it cocoons itself and emerges as Godzilla Terrestris, a land-adapted form whose atomic breath doesn't fire as a beam at all, but blooms outward as a massive blue ring of nuclear energy. Each transformation happens faster than the one before it. According to the show's own internal news reports, the jump from Aquatilis to the final form takes barely 4 hours. That final form is Godzilla Ultima, who settles near Tokyo Station, wraps himself in a churning red vortex, and grows past 100 meters almost overnight, powerful enough to decapitate the serpentine kaiju Manda with a single blast and shrug off tank fire without slowing down. What makes Ultima different from every other version on this list isn't his size, it's what's actually powering him. A substance called red dust, built from what the show calls dimensional archetype molecules, hinting that this Godzilla isn't just a mutated animal, but a manifestation of something operating outside normal physics entirely. It ultimately takes the robot hero Jet Jaguar and a weapon called the orthogonal diagonalizer, ironically named as a callback to the oxygen destroyer that killed the very first Godzilla in 1954, to finally bring him down. 67 years later, the franchise was still finding new ways to end the same story. Godzilla Minus One. And then, in 2023, the franchise went backward to move forward. Godzilla Minus One returns to the exact wound the character was born from. Post-war Japan, a nation already flattened by firebombing and defeat, forced to face a monster with none of the government, military, or infrastructure it had in every previous film. This Godzilla begins as a smaller, already dangerous creature native to Odo Island, standing around 15 meters before American nuclear testing at Bikini Atolls in 1946 irradiates it further, growing it to 50.1 meters and roughly 20,000 tons. The design deliberately calls back to the jagged, scarred silhouette of the original 1954 suit, stripped of nearly 7 decades of franchise polish, terrifying again specifically because it feels ancient rather than familiar. The reversal here isn't in Godzilla's biology, it's in what the film did with him. Made for less than $15 million, a fraction of what a single Hollywood blockbuster spends on visual effects alone, Godzilla Minus One went on to become the highest-grossing Japanese live-action film ever released in America, and then, in March 2024, it did something no Godzilla film had managed across 70 years and dozens of movies. It won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, the character's first Oscar of any kind. A tiny team of 35 artists beat productions worth many times their budget, proving that the fear this creature was built to represent in 1954 still lands 70 years and 9 wildly different bodies later. From a 6-foot rubber suit in a Tokyo studio to an Oscar stage in Los Angeles, which era of Godzilla do you think got it most right? Drop it in the comments.